Hello, US1. Hope you guys had a great weekend. Happy fourth quarter. Yes, very exciting. Um, Classic joke of the day today. This is one of my all-time favorites from this calendar. They kind of repeat them, doing this a couple of years. So this is a good one. It's a little bit long, so I'm going to have to read this for you here, right? There we go. So I'm kind of looking over here and reading it. So two birds watched as a turtle spent 2 hours climbing a tree only to perch on a branch and jump off, crashing straight to the ground. Uninjured, the turtle began the long climb up the tree again. He once more jumped and fell to the ground. Honey, said the first bird to the second, don't you think it's time we told Arthur he's adopted? I love that joke. I love that joke. I don't know why I love that joke. That's a good one. All right. So for today, we'll pick up after the Battle of Antietam and talk primarily about the Emancipation Proclamation. So you have that and talk a little bit about the Battle of Chancellorsville, which happens in early 1863, getting us up to that turning point, which will be the Battle of Gettysburg. So that's what you have for today. There's no additional homework tonight besides the do now, but you should be working on your research outlines. The next piece is due next week, and then basically every week thereafter, something else is due, right? So you should now be like working on your research. You collected your sources, so now you should be like taking notes on those sources, that type of thing. What I will do is I'll make videos and attach them on Google Classroom for each of the steps, explaining each of the steps. So you'll have that for you. I'll get those up hopefully later today. But yeah, so I hope all is well. Stay safe, stay smart, and talk to you guys later. Bye. Pick up after the Battle of Antietam and get us into 1863, which historians refer to as the year of the big battle when looking at the American Civil War. So, as the video you watched last class kind of talked about, the Battle of Antietam, while not the turning point of the war, is a turning point for Lincoln. And so, going into the Battle of Antietam, right, Lincoln had come to the conclusion that slavery needed to end. And so Lincoln had come to the conclusion in the summer of 1862 that he was going to issue an Emancipation Proclamation. And as you remember from the video, his cabinet said, no, you can't do it yet because we need a victory. Because if you don't pass this after a victory, it will look like, a desperate move. And so Lincoln waits for a victory. He has the Battle of Antietam in September of 1862. And since the Union does not technically lose the Battle of Antietam, they don't quite win it either. But since it's not a loss, he can spin it as if it is a win. And so, using that victory, he then, in September of 1862, issues the Emancipation Proclamation, which will not go into effect until January 1 of 1863. So I've included the Emancipation Proclamation for you to read, so you have it there. And the interesting thing about this is that Lincoln is a lawyer, and Lincoln knows that he cannot just unilaterally free the slaves. He's understands the Constitution. Remember, the last time the Constitution spoke on the issue of slavery was in the Dred Scott decision, and the Dred Scott decision says that slavery is legal. So Lincoln can't free the slaves without a constitutional amendment. But as a wartime president, Lincoln does get expanded powers during war, what are simply known as war powers. And so Lincoln has come to the conclusion that the Constitution allows him extra latitude to do certain things as long as he can kind of make the argument that it will help the country in a war. And so we see this often. We see this in our own times, in terms that certain First Amendment protections, against searches and freedom of speech and that type of goes away in time of war. And so with the Civil War, Lincoln realizes that the slaves help the South fight the Civil War. And so he makes the argument that I'm going to free the slaves in states that are in active rebellion. The thought by doing that, I'm limiting the South's ability to fight the war, and I'm helping the North win the war. So the thought is, if you are not in active rebellion, you can keep your slaves. So this does nothing about the border states. So remember, Maryland, Delaware, um, West Virginia, Kentucky, these were slave states, but they remain loyal to the Union. So according to the Emancipation Proclamation, they get to keep their slaves. This only frees slaves in the Confederacy. Okay. So the thought was, how is this actually a war measure, and how do you kind of make this work? Right. And so Lincoln believes that if you take away slaves, right, if you take away slaves, Southerners now are going to have to do more of the work themselves. Right. So in the Southern Army, slaves are the ones, serving as nurses. Slaves are the ones doing the cooking. Slaves are the ones doing the cleaning. Slaves are the ones digging trenches and building defenses. While in the Northern Army, the Union Army, that's all being done by soldiers. So, in terms of the Northern Army, part of their army, part of their effective fighting force is reduced because they have soldiers doing other tasks. In the South, you don't have that. So, if you take that away from the South, it forces them to use some of their soldiers to do the tasks that slaves were doing. So, that's part of his logic kind of with this. Um, of course, the irony is that everyone thinks the Emancipation Proclamation actually frees the slaves. It doesn't free the slaves. It doesn't free anybody, right? The places that are under Lincoln's control, he doesn't free them, right? Those states are not rebelling, so those places get to keep their slaves. The only place it deals with are slaves in the South, but the South has rebelled. They're not listening to Lincoln. So technically, no one is freed under the Emancipation Proclamation. Not a single slave is freed. But it does change the war. And it's brilliant in how it does this. Because remember, the South was looking for England and France to come and support them. But what Lincoln has done now is he's changed while the North is fighting. The North now is not simply fighting to just keep the Union together. They are now fighting to free the slaves, right? They're now an army of emancipation. And so if you're a soldier now in the North, you now have an extra reason to fight because every time you march through Virginia and you win battles in Virginia, you're freeing slaves. Because remember, those slaves are freed under this proclamation. And so if you're England, you have to decide, okay, am I going to join a war? Now, when the war was about rights, you could say, yeah, South, you know what? You are getting treated poorly. We'll come and we'll help you defend yourself. But now, if the war is about slavery, no country is going to come and support the South when Lincoln has reframed it, right? So now what Lincoln is basically saying is what everyone knows. This war is about slavery. And so England, if you want to come in and join the South, what you're really doing is helping the South keep their slaves. And England cannot do that. And without foreign help, the South is doomed, right? They need outside assistance to mitigate the amount of resources that the North has, right? And so as a result, right, this is what makes the Emancipation Proclamation absolutely brilliant. It refocuses the war. It gives the North one more reason to fight, right? And, right, it also keeps foreign powers out of the war. Now, the war is going to continue, right? The Emancipation Proclamation is not certainly it's not going to be popular in the South, but it's not universally popular in the North either. Um, and I've got a document that I'll share with you as well about how this is received in New Jersey. Um, but the war must continue. And so in May of 1863, we have a massive battle taking place in Virginia, which is known as the Battle of Chancellorsville. And the Battle of Chancellorsville is going to be Joe Hooker is now in charge of the Army of the Potomac, right? McClellan is finally replaced for not pursuing after the Battle of Antietam, and Hooker is going to take on Robert E. Lee, and Robert E. Lee is going to find himself outnumbered in this battle 2-1. And so Hooker has a massive numeric advantage. This is the largest advantage the Union Army is going to have in any major battle, and Lee knows this. The battle begins at dusk, so most fighting begins early in the day. Just remember, the Battle of Antietam began early in the morning. As soon as daylight began, the firing began. The Battle of Chancellorsville, the majority of this battle is going to be fought in the dark. And what happens here is that Robert E. Lee, being from Virginia, knows the geography and sends Stonewall Jackson to flank the Union position. So basically come around through woods that nobody thought you can move an army through this really thick thicket, which is heavy underbrush and that type of stuff. Completely surprises Joe Hooker's forces. Joe Hooker's forces basically collapse in the face of this. The whole Union army falls apart. Robert E. Lee then comes in, and Robert E. Lee basically smashes what is left of Hooker's forces. And so the Battle of Chancellorsville is a major, major defeat for the North. It's the worst defeat of the war for the North. The only thing that's kind of good that comes out of this is that Stonewall Jackson is killed at the Battle of Chancellorsville. And at the Battle of Chancellorsville, he's killed by his own troops after the battle. It's friendly fire. Again, it's dark. He's traveling down a road at night. He's confused as to where he is. Soldiers up ahead hear someone approaching on horseback. They call out into the dark, "Identify yourself. Who are you?" Stonewall Jackson hesitates. Are these Northerners asking who I am? Are these Southerners asking who I am? And so those Southern soldiers following orders, when someone doesn't reply, you assume they're the enemy and you shoot. And so Stonewall Jackson is shot in the arm. They have to amputate his arm from the loss of blood. His body is weakened. He catches pneumonia and is killed. But the Battle of Chancellorsville is a horrible, horrible defeat for the Northern Army. Lincoln, who assumed a great victory, once he saw the numeric advantage that they had, was actually present at the War Office when these results came in, and Lincoln gets the telegram that it is a loss, and Lincoln just mumbles under his breath, "My God, what will the country say?" So, reeling from that defeat, Joe Hooker wants to attack. He learns that Lee is swinging north. Lee is planning on coming back into Maryland again. And Joe Hooker learns of this and tells Lincoln that I want to attack into Richmond. Let me attack Richmond. It's unprotected. Robert E. Lee is not there. And Lincoln tells Joe Hooker, no, you have to go fight Lee. There's some arguing back and forth between the two men, and eventually Lincoln has to fight in Joe Hooker, which means it is now time for another general of the Army of the Potomac. And this new gentleman is going to be Meade, and Meade will take over the army just days before the largest battle of the Civil War, and that is the Battle of Gettysburg, which we can talk about as our next lesson.